It's Monday, April 27th. I hope you're doing well and staying safe wherever you may be watching from. Today on the live stream, I'll show you how I migrated our code from Cloud Run to Kubernetes Engine. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Adventures in the Cloud, where we explore new and interesting concepts, tools, and ideas live from my webcam to your screen. My name is Yufeng Guo, and today we're going to be looking at why and how I shifted things over from Cloud Run to GKE. A while ago, Dustin Ingram, my colleague, helped me get started with Cloud Run, and we built kind of a simple little website that called a AI platform prediction backend to make a little prediction. And basically, at some point I realized I would probably need to move off of Cloud Run. It served a good purpose, kind of coming out of the gates, but after I thought a little bit more about what we were trying to build, I realized there were certain pieces that we were kind of falling short on. So I'm going to switch over to our screen here. And this was kind of what we had, right? Where you could choose a file, and assuming I can get to the right folder, you could upload something, and assuming it still works, you click submit, and it would hit that AI platform prediction backend and grab that prediction. But the thing is, what we ultimately want to build, right, is this end-to-end pipeline. And one of the key things that we had started doing in a previous live stream was working in that Jupyter notebook with that persistent disk, that huge data set of open images. And I had loaded it onto the persistent disk, or PD, specifically with the intent of basically using that as my pool of data to read from. I wanted to see if I could get away with pulling the data from there for all of my kind of data streaming purposes, and hoping that that would be more performant, perhaps, than uploading them to cloud storage directly, right? Giving it kind of a little more closeness, maybe putting it on the cluster wherever I was hoping Cloud Run could do this, connecting the Cloud Run instance to that persistent disk. Because as we learned with the conversation with Brian Dorsey and the very first episode ever of this effort, virtual machines in a data center in the public cloud are not like virtual machines when we run them on our own machine, right? It's not just kind of it's distributed, and the disks are the same way. So they're little blocks of data scattered all over the data center. And so I thought, it doesn't seem that unreasonable that if Cloud Run is built on top of containerization technology running inside a data center, maybe we could get away with connecting a persistent disk to whatever the hot instance of Cloud Run that has my app on it is running that code to be able to read from a persistent disk that I've pre-configured. Unfortunately, I was mistaken, and Cloud Run does not support attaching a persistent disk directly. And so here we are. I was left with the kind of position where, well, I guess we're going to have to go to Kubernetes. And so I started kind of digging around. Step one is we got to figure out how to convert things over to GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine, and then deal with the problem of also I need to add this persistent disk to my Kubernetes cluster. And so in doing so, this was kind of an interesting journey into figuring out what it would take to switch over from Cloud Run to Kubernetes Engine in terms of Cloud Run is billed as this super simple, and it really was very straightforward. Our notes with Justin, these were basically our build and deploy commands where we ran cloud build and we submitted our code and gave it a Google Container Registry tag. And then we ran gcloud run deploy, so run as in Cloud Run, and we deployed it. So in a lot of ways, it was a similar workflow to something like App Engine, if you're familiar with that. And it ran in a region. It took care of managing all the things, just like it said it would. And that was really nice. So I wanted to see what the less nice version of it would be, right? And so we have here what ended up being the full deployment, including the persistent volumes piece. And so you can see this is the original version before I added the persistent disk. And if I can make the window bigger, here we are. This is pretty close, almost exactly to what the GKE kind of getting started site talks about. So if I pull that up, if we go to Kubernetes Engine and we just go to, say, this quick start, right? And when I first looked at this, it was, getting started. Okay, good. But then the problem was this original quick start actually deploys when we scroll past all of the original configuration. Yeah, this hello app, it talks about I think it uses Go or Node. Yeah, it runs a Node. Nope, no, that's nodes in GKE. Was it Go? Yeah, so it talks about the code here. It's a Go web server. And so I was like, all right, so that's not quite what I was looking for. And so that brought me to here, deploying a language-specific app, which is a nice page. If you're getting started with Kubernetes Engine or Kubernetes in general, they have this selector here. You can choose from Go, Node, Python, Java, C#, PHP, or Ruby. And it's the same sort of hello world template that'll help us get started, which is really nice. And I had gone through some GKE stuff in the distant past, and it used direct kind of commands of like kubectl run and kubectl deploy and things like that. So it didn't use what they're using here, which is, if I skip ahead just a moment past the original commands, when we deploy, it's using these deployment.yaml and service.yaml files. So it skips over the more imperative way of managing your cluster, which I think in large part is a good thing. Getting folks ready, to really build for kind of a real production-esque environment is not a bad thing. And so I basically took this file. You can see the similarity between these two. If I can put them side by side-ish, let me move it over a little bit more. Right, like I basically took this file, dropped it in VS Code, and I changed some names around so that not everything would still be called hello and hello world. And I called it predictions deployment, and I added deployment there mostly just to help reduce confusion for myself in terms of what to call things. I'm not 100% sure because I'm not really a deep Kubernetes person yet, at least, shall we say. And so I left things like this -app piece. I didn't know if there were requirements around maybe container names have to have a dash. I would guess not. But like some of these labels, I made sure not to add dashes if they weren't in the examples so that I wouldn't inadvertently screw myself over. And so you'll notice that here it passes in this port variable. And so if we go back, we can see it here as well in the source code of this application. Let me get this window lined up. Go up to, yeah, so here we can see that in the original Docker file, which I more or less have the same one of right here. Oh, look, Docker extension is recommended. Sure. I don't know why I hadn't already put that in there, but it's good. So I think that means it's installed. Yeah, it's installed. Cool. Now I want to go back to the file view. Great. So this is not my Docker file. Here's my Docker file. And it's almost identical. It's basically what we had for Cloud Run. So this is a good thing. The Docker file that we use for Cloud Run appears to be almost identical to the one that we can use in Kubernetes Engine, at least to get us started. So you'll see that the Getting Started Docker file is also essentially identical. What I thought was interesting and what really tripped me up initially was that this port variable was still kind of written this way. And for whatever reason, my original deploy file, I don't remember if it contained this or if I tried to deploy it without using a YAML file. I think that's what it was. I tried to deploy it without using a YAML file. I ran something like this, where I tried to create a deployment directly using kubectl create deployment and pass in the deployment name, the image, which was built using the same command that we used when we did cloud build. The same gcloud build submit command works just fine. And then it wouldn't work. It just kept crash looping. And digging into it, first thing I want to call out is some kind of general debug things, because one of the difficulties with using a guide, any sort of quick start, is that it will basically give you this happy path or golden path where if you follow these steps, it works on my machine. And so sometimes when things go wrong for whatever reason, even if you thought you copied the steps exactly, and maybe you did, and something changed and broke and the guide isn't up to date, the tutorial is out of date, and something a new change got pushed that broke the tutorial and it needs to get fixed now. But how can you solve your problem in the moment? And so some of the commands that really saved me, let's see if this is still connected or not. I might need to reconnect gcloud to my deployment. Okay, so it is up. And so we can see that, let's see if I can make this bigger-ish. Get this over here. And we can see that if I get this pod and I'm going to copy this, one of my workflow essentially turned into getting my pods after each deployment and pasting it into this variable, this environment variable on my local space, so that I could then run things like kubectl logs dash f. So this was a big one for me. You can then kind of tail the output from the pod, as well as this describe, which I think I usually ran first. And notice that I'm using that command environment variable pod, right? This pod variable, so that I don't have to copy this into these commands every single time. So that was really, really nice. And that kind of gave me insight into the kinds of errors that were popping up as I kind of iterated over this. In my particular case, the error I had was really, really dumb. In my YAML, in my image file, I had an extra S right here, and that's what did me in. I had an image that basically couldn't be found, right? And initially I had this issue with this port not being contained, and that was because I was running this command right here, create deployment. And this command I had gotten from a previous guide somewhere else, one of my other text files, and you'll notice that it does not inject the port number. And you'll see that since it wasn't using this YAML file, but our app.py, or not even app.py, our Docker file specifically, it's setting up this command to be run on startup. And the error I was getting was that port, quote, quote, is not valid, right? Because this environment variable hadn't been set, and I don't have anything in my Docker file that says that if this isn't set, just use 8080 or just use something. And I've seen Docker files that have that sort of language in them, and you can use something like that to save yourself as well. The other thing I added in was later on was environment variable credentials. So this is these keys is not best practice. It's very much like a temporary move for me to just like get things working. I uploaded a service account key that is just a file in the container. Kubernetes supports secrets, and you should definitely use that, and we will cover that at some point once I move these into secrets. So this is very much still not a production ready setup, but it's trying to head in that direction. This is kind of the development workflow to get there. And so let's see, then once you have your kind of kubectl set up, what other changes ended up having to be made? Right. So we have to add this deployment.yaml. Whoops, this one, no PD, right? Because I added the persistent disk afterwards, which is fairly straightforward. From a development process standpoint, one big difference is that each time Dustin and I ran this, we were able to say, push a new deploy of Cloud Run. You'll notice that when we hit submit, there was no version number. Like I had stated, when I was up with Dustin on that live stream that like maybe we should do v1, v2, v3, and he said that we shouldn't need to and this should be fine, and so we left it that way and it worked. And I suspect it's because we issue this Cloud Run deploy command, and so each time it gets that, it checks Cloud Build and says, hey, what's your latest build? Okay, let me grab that and use it. The trouble with doing this on Kubernetes was that if I left this off or just put latest, then whenever I would deploy a new, roll out a new deployment using, where does the command go? kubectl apply-f deployment.yaml, right, pointing to something like this, it would basically say, oh, the deployment hasn't changed because the container image is the same. And I am guessing that my workflow is a weird workaround that shouldn't be necessary. If there are folks on the live stream, or maybe you're watching this later, who know how to get around this weird behavior, I actually looked for this. There's a lot of stuff about kind of rolling updates and things like that, and if you know how to make it so that I don't have to literally every time I want to push a new version change this to like v5, v6, I could see how being explicit is better than implicit. And so we should perhaps tag our images with version numbers, and then when we push it out, it's explicit that way. But the downside is every time I run gcloud build submit, I have to also include this number, right? Because the workflow is I build my image with a number, and then I apply a new deployment configuration with that same number. So if I have 13 here, I gotta have 13 here, because the deployment is pulling from the image repository. And if I leave it at latest, my concern is that I would just run it and it would say, oh, this config file looks the same. I already have this config. Okay, there's nothing to be done. So that's the deployment piece. And then the final step, that also needs to be done is, after you create the Kubernetes cluster, is to roll out, deploy a service, right? Kubernetes has this concept of deployments, which are just the pod on the node, and it's kind of internal to your cluster. And then you have to deploy a service to expose your cluster to the world. And so in this case, I just used the built-in service.yaml. I can show side by side again, just to confirm that I haven't made any big changes to them. So I'm pretty sure there's not much going on with these two. So I've got v1, too far, service. I changed the name to front end because this is supposed to be kind of my little front end website, for lack of a better definition, but it's very much the same. I noticed that this kind of naming has to match in certain ways with the other YAML file, the deployment YAML file. So definitely watch out for that. Yeah, all things considered, it was fine, I guess. Like, as someone who is not super in depth on Kubernetes, I was able to get this working and grab that external IP using kubectl get services. So it all basically worked in the end. There was, you can tell from the number of deployments I had to roll out that it did take a couple of tries, for lack of a better term. And if I go to, let's go over to container builder here, container registry. And oh, Will has a question. Could I toggle between green and blue instead of increasing version? Oh, that's a good point. Is it sufficient just for it to be different than current, or does it need to be different than any prior? Okay, so that's a good question. Do we need to have it just be different from the current thing? I don't think it needs to be different from anything prior, because you could imagine a rollback situation where you'll, maybe you're in version 10, you roll out 11, and then you're like, no, I'm going to go back to 9. And so you change your deployment.yaml and it pushes it to 9. Let me go to this. So this took a number of builds, and assuming these load. Yeah, so you can see when I first started out, I didn't tag any of them. And as a result, yeah, they're just untagged. And that was when I was building with Cloud Run. And then I started pushing builds and tagging them with versions. Now you'll notice that latest is this one. And this is one of those things that I feel like people don't explain when they talk about Kubernetes and Docker builds. When you tag a version, I don't think latest is a special word. I think it's just a string, it's a convention, and that people just use the word latest as a tag, and I suspect that's how they're getting around it, now that I think about it. Seeing the fact that latest is down here and not actually like a special thing that says this is actually the most recent thing. Latest is just a string, and you could put any string. You can say most recent instead of latest. And so I bet I could run gcloud build submit, and if I put latest here, it will take latest away from this particular version. It will become perhaps untagged, just like the ones below it are. And then the next one, instead of 14, it'll be latest. And so if I do a new build, it strips that latest tag up one. It depends on if Kubernetes is looking at the image on GCR, or if it's just purely diffing the deployment.yaml file that it already has. Because I could also release something that's also tagged v13. I could just push a new thing, tag it the same, just like folks tag latest the same, latest. I could do v13 over and over again. And I want to say Kubernetes wouldn't make any changes. So let's try it out. And this might be one of those things that are just different between Kubernetes engine and Cloud Run. So copy this, make sure this is in view here, and build push. So this is pushing an image that's going to be tagged latest. It's going to tar up our workspace and push it up. Rajan says you can use the git commit hash as a tag. Git repo. Funny. So this should work, assuming that the internet holds up. And while this is uploading, I bet the stream probably did a little moment. How is this 52 megs? What did I do? I must have put something in here that's way bigger than I expected, and now I'm paying the price. All right, we are in this folder, Oh, is it because of the PyCache stuff? I thought I already I put the appropriate ignore files in here. I have a docker ignore and a git ignore. Docker is ignoring all this. So what is tripping it up? These two should be tripping. Oh, the env. Right, I bet it's the Python environment. Or a timestamp. Yeah, like there's definitely ways to make unique values. Like I'm not concerned about there being unique values. It's more the, ooh, failed. All right, build. Already have image. Ah, look at that. We already have the image. Unable to unable to evaluate symlinks in Docker file path. Workspace, Docker, no such. Am I in the wrong? I might just be in the wrong folder though. Oh, that's why the upload was so big, was because indeed, you gotta be in the right directory if you want Docker builds to work. Shocker. All right, let's try this again. And we can see this fail when I refresh here, maybe. Oh, this is GCR. This isn't actually Cloud Builder itself. So if we go down to Cloud Build, we can see the history of the builds. This looks promising though. It looks like it uploaded quickly. And we can see that failed build there. It failed in 10 seconds. Nice. But yeah, usually the build takes about 30 something seconds, just short of 40 seconds. Okay, this is still going. I guess the requisite 37, 38 seconds to finish. And so once that's done, we should expect to see this latest up here. So I'm going to refresh this. So that's pushed as latest. And so now if I, we should make some changes. So what I've got here is a index.html, and I've been putting this version latest the first time. I'm going to save that. Oh, shoot. That's not going to go because we just packaged it up. So this is one of the weird workflow things I realized is like every time I push an image, I have to change the HTML file before I build, because now it actually should just say v13. So just remember that, and we'll make this second time for next time. All right. We have this. Now we need to do the next step, which is to apply this deployment. So let's go over and check our deployment file. Again, because I actually have persistent disk attached in order to make this all work, just like we'll cover this in the next live stream about it, but it's purely additive stuff. So let's change this to latest. And yeah, this is definitely one of those moments where maybe I should have started a GitHub repo earlier, and not a GitHub, even just Git, and then I could go to a certain branch and all this would be set to the right state. The magic of Git. And all right, so we've applied this configuration. And so now what I usually then do is I run kubectl get pods, and it's always, this is what I want to see. I want to see a pod terminating. I want to see a container creating, at which point I can copy that container ID out, and I can paste it into here, run the export. I could probably bash this all up into a bash script. I started fiddling with that, but okay, so there's our pod describe or describe pod. We see that it's normal, it started, looks like things are going to be okay. So at that point, I'll run the logs -f. So now we can see that, what is it, Junicorn started okay. This is where I would see any live errors coming straight out of there. And then we should be able to go to our external IP address, which I should add. I already know because I put this service up a while ago, but you would grab that by running get services, right? kubectl get services. and we would see that it has this external IP, and then we could put it here and it would work. And in a similar way as we were before, we can upload. I'll choose the other picture this time, click submit, and the file must end in a JPEG. Oh, right, because I I added some more validation to do this, like allow us to pick an image from Firestore on the 2 episodes ago on the live stream. So it'll grab stuff and it all works great. So, but the thing we're trying to test here is kind of the workflow comparison between Cloud Run and Kubernetes engine. And so, you know, these are kind of some of the differences, right? If you remember, in Cloud Run, we basically could get away with just running the build and deploy step, and then it would just work. And now I'm kind of copy pasting pod IDs, tailing the errors. And so that being said, let's just show this changeover, right? So I've changed the HTML. Now it says latest version second time instead of version, you know, v13 there. And yeah, let's build it, right? Because I don't think there's anything else to change. We don't need this Docker ignore file, but I will pull up the Docker file and we'll say, oh, there's nothing to say here, right? So that's nice. Docker file can stay the same. And where is our command for submitting a new thing? So we're going to call it the same thing. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens to this row here. Will latest be stripped away or not? So let's run the build, still tagging it latest rather than calling it, you know, whatever we're at now, v15 or something crazy like that. And I could see how, I wonder if you can have multiple tags. That would be interesting. Like if I can edit tags. Yeah, I can have multiple tags, it looks like. I don't know what the syntax is though. Is it comma delimited? Because you could potentially, you know, keep doing latest, and then once in a while you can be like, it's the v2 release and latest for now until latest gets ripped away. But once this builds, what will be really interesting now is if I run this deployment, you know, kubectl apply and push that deployment, because remember, this deployment file I haven't changed yet, but the underlying image is different now, even though the string path to that image remains unchanged. So paste this in here. It's either going to say no changes detected, or it will roll out a change and I will, you know, eat soap or something. So there it is. So deployment unchanged. So we need to make, it has to be different. I can say, I could change this back to v13. And what's interesting, of course, is that now this is changed the way we thought it was. This is unchanged. Run this again, and you'll see that's v13, and so that's this version here. So if I roll it back to v13, basically, okay, and then what we'll do is, so it's configured, right? This time it's not saying unchanged, it's configured. And so once that rolls out, so that one's up and running, and it switches over, we should expect this to say, oh, there it is. I guess it refreshed. It says v13. And so now if I go and make it latest again, it will not go back to the old latest, but the new latest, which is this version latest the second time is what I ended up calling it. So latest, save that deployment file, confirm that the pods have cleared, and we're going to apply this deployment. It will be different, right? Because I'm pretty sure under the hood, what it's doing is Kubernetes has this deployment.yaml file saved, and it's just diffing that state. This whole like stateful deployments idea kind of hinges on that notion. And so now we have this new one up and running. And so now if I refresh this, what we're going to expect to see is this v13 should change to version something the second time, or whatever it was. There it is, version latest the second time. And so there's no way now to access this tag in the middle here that got ripped away without actually directly editing the tag and calling it something else like v14. So that at least makes me feel better about this crazy workflow that I was doing, because I wanted to make sure each version pushed correctly. And that's why I had in that HTML file for index.html, I had basically version, v13 or v14. Cannot use substituted values. So Rajan asks, cannot use substitute values to pull out the generated values. I think if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, Rajan, is that you're asking if we can automate this process, right? Like I certainly think we could. It just wasn't my priority at the time. Like all these numbers need to match up, right? When I run kubectl apply, I need to have the value in the deployment match up to the value that I've set in this build command, right? And so I had created, I'll show you this bash script. Yeah, using cloud build substitute values. Cloud build substitute values. Is that a command? Yeah, I mean, we can substitute the values in as we go along. And I think long term, that's what we want to do. Where is, yeah. So this was what we had used for Cloud Run. So this was the GKE version, GKE edition, was to basically have a this command line take an argument. And so you can see here, tree cloud build submit, and if I go to the end, I get the first argument out, and so that I would tag it that way. But I also needed to make sure the deployment.yaml was correct. So I could set the deployment YAML with some environment variable and use sed to automatically replace it, which is what I probably should have done. My awk and sed capabilities aren't as good as I'd like them to be. And then once that's done, to run kubectl apply. What was nice about having this vim step here was that it just helped make sure there was kind of a human in the loop as I was going through this. So this wasn't a bad way to do it. I just had to make sure I remembered what number we were on. It did, however, leave out the index.html editing, which I could also roll into here, to be fair, with more kind of substituting. And that would be a clever way to get around it. I think the what I wanted to add, in the time we have left. Oh, Rajan has a comment, e.g. something. I'll wait for him to finish here, but in the time that we have left, I was thinking we could solve some of these bugs, and I can talk through some of the changes I had built in. Yeah, I can pass in the values, exactly. So here I'm passing in the values to this script, and I'm capturing it here and using that instead of hard coding it. Yeah. So I can improve this script, but it's the sort of thing that I feel like there should be a better solution than having me, who is not super experienced with Kubernetes, kind of hack around this and have to build a little script around it in particular. And I guess that's what Cloud Run is, right? Cloud Run solves some of this. The script we had to build and deploy our Cloud Run instance was much simpler, and it didn't require, here if I scroll to the right, it didn't require us to tag it with anything. We didn't have any colon something at the end. We could just run it, and every time we ran Cloud Run deploy, I guess it fetched a fresh version of whatever the latest one was without really caring about kind of the specific version tagging. So yeah, I this is kind of the trade-off, right? It's control versus it's flexibility and control versus kind of ease of use and slightly more constrained and a more prescribed approach to doing something. And so that's the trade-off. And in the end, the reason why I kind of was forced to go to Kubernetes Engine or go to Kubernetes in general was I had to be able to configure under the hood the persistent volume, the persistent disk that we were attaching to, and it was a real journey to get that working. It was way harder than I had expected to make that work, because the guides were not very clear, because I think persistent volumes is supposedly some sort of more advanced idea or something, or advanced use case, which I don't know that it should be. And so the explanations were a lot more in depth than I was ready for. And so I was kind of trying to piece it together. I mean, I was literally on I was on all sorts of websites, but like at one point I was literally on the Oracle website looking at their documentation for Kubernetes doing persistent volumes, because it's all the same, right? It's all the same sort of idea. So I was just had to see it presented like 17 different ways before it finally clicked. There was one piece in particular towards the end that I kept tripping up over, and I'll kind of highlight that on Wednesday, the exact way, like what was that missing connection. But for today, in the time that we have left, I want to go and fix some of this behavior, the connectivity between the front end and the Python piece. Here we had, you might have noticed that subtle bug, because what I was adding was this text input, this form input, where I could type in the, where I could type in these file names, right? We saw some that, and then have it read that image from the persistent disk, upload it to cloud storage, update the visited value in Firestore, and call that prediction endpoint. So do all of those things. But what I was noticing was in adding all this error checking for this text box, right? Like it has to be a JPEG. I ended up somehow borking this kind of choose file mode, where if I do this and I don't have any text in here and I click submit, it's still doing invalid. So I have a bad if statement in there somewhere. So I want to fix that. Create visit image. This is one of those things where you have to like remember how you were writing this a while ago, and then yell at yourself for doing terrible documentation and code structuring. So that'll be fun. Okay, so here's the error. I see what I did. So I had if image is in the file. So this is if I had uploaded the image, then I did the 64-bit encoding. And then if they typed it in, I grabbed it from the form. I validate that it ends in JPEG. I'm sure PNGs work fine too. But and then I create the full path, open it up. So because remember, this app.py code is executing on a pod which can read directly from that persistent disk, and then I'll encode that local file. And it's in an open wrapper because this function takes a file handler, because the way this works is this uploaded file is a file handler object, so I had to make it similar enough. But the problem, of course, is that this shouldn't be an if else, but it should be if not, it shouldn't be an if, but it should be a if else. Because, yeah, and then I could have some kind of finally clause. If I can spell finally, that'd be great. Well, I don't know, it wouldn't even be finally, would it? It would just be else. So if nothing else, right? If the image is not in the file and it's not in anything else, which shouldn't work in general if I refresh this, it goes to there, sure, because there's nothing in that field. We can do better than this, obviously, but as just like a temporary thing, we'll just put return. How about must provide file name or upload a file. Really, I should probably, well, no, I can't grab the file name from here and then grab it from the local disk. This is probably good enough. And maybe I won't, because one of the weird behaviors here, right, is when I submit, I have to go back. I wouldn't want that. What if we could just replace this text with that instead? All right, let's go to the HTML. Or we can insert this bit here. I just need like a place to put messages, basically, right? So, and then end if. I've never been very good at HTML templating. So if we have, let's just say message, right? Like basically this is a place for messages to live. And I think I'm just gonna put the message in here, whatever the string is. So this is like a string message, and then let me save that, put it over here, and then instead of just returning invalid image, try again, because that basically, instead of returning any sort of HTML, it would really mess us up there. Let's set the message. Whoa. Message is this variable, and because of the way blocks work in Python. I always get Python and JavaScript mixed up. I want to say this will still, no, it won't exist. Good stuff. All right, quote, quote. Hopefully that still will be a false on the if message. So we don't have a blank thing. We can check it. That'll be an interesting little HTML check. And then b equals this, open images equals that. And then message equals message. Yeah, that should do it. All right, so we gotta fix our versioning issue, bring it back down to earth here. We're on v14 in this land. Let's go to the HTML. Where did I put v? Oh, not the Python file, the HTML file. v14. Also, any thoughts on, when I finally do upgrade this webpage? I promise I will. It will not continue remaining a completely unstyled, terrible looking website. We will add some better styling to this to make it more palatable to look at and use, because we do want to end up with like a usable kind of workflow here. So I'm going to put that in, and then we got to fix our deployment file. Any thoughts on what web framework to use in terms of all the various web front ends? So I'm going to put v14 here, copy this command, I'll get pods at the same time, and just paste that in there, press enter, and when it's done, it'll just run it. Let's take a look at the live chat here. We've got, yeah, Rajan says, that's Kubernetes for you, indeed. I'm learning that the hard way. And let's see, pull a thread, and yeah, you find out all sorts of interesting things. Hopefully I don't have to pull too many more threads. I really want Kubernetes just to be a simple thing. And this actually leads to an interesting question around, do we think that, when I do the pub sub piece down the road, not that far down the road, but it's going to have to happen. Did I copy the wrong one? Ooh, the pod was not fun. I was wondering, there's lots of ways to get the Kubernetes, not Kubernetes, the pub sub kind of be a subscriber. And so I was thinking about whether I wanted to, all right, there we go. I was thinking about whether I wanted to do that from this same cluster, or if I wanted to grab it with Cloud Run. I know it seems like we've like written ourselves out of Cloud Run, but it's like, do I want to redeploy the whole thing? I mean, it would be a different service, right? I would build a separate service, but it would be in the same Kubernetes cluster. And it's like, well, in the grand scheme of things, if you're really trying to productionize a thing, maybe it would be good to have it in all in one code base and one deployment. But at the same time, if you can swallow the architectural complexity, right? You add the architectural complexity vis-a-vis running Kubernetes engine and Cloud Run for different purposes, then you might be able to do something more akin to using the right tool for the right thing, because Cloud Run will allow you to independently scale that piece, not have to manage it, but like make sure PubSub is working. And you can see here, we've got v14 going properly here, which is great. That's what we want to see. And, oh yes, let's check to make sure this works. So if I do ASDF, so this is why I tailed the thing. What did I do wrong with my error checking here? Models, return error to everything, invalid expected image, got empty file. Indeed, that was an empty file. Let's see. I suspect it's because I did a if-else rather than if-if. No, it was elif, right? Or did I do an else? That's probably what got me then. Where is the code? All right. Yeah. So if there's an image in the files, then do this. Else if there's a image file name, then do that. Else if we do that. Oh, it returns text. Weird. I didn't fix that piece. If image bytes not in 64-bit image, See, this was supposed to get around this problem. Where is it calling? Somehow it's still reaching prediction request and making the call, which is down here. Somehow it skirted around all of my error checking. Huh. If image is in request.files, which it wasn't, but maybe there was more to it than I realized. Because before I didn't have an elif, it was just an if. And so when we open, all right, well, let's test the happy case first. Is it possible this, okay, so this breaks it too, just to get a full picture of all the failure modes. And I'm guessing the error is the same error. It is the same error. It's still getting an empty file. So let's see if this one works. Is it failing on everything or just on? Okay, so the local file works, but the uploaded path fails. So it's going through this path regardless. That seems to be what's happening. Even when I don't. I bet this image, I bet it goes through this regardless. I have to reverse these two until I figure out a better way to detect the true presence of there being an image. That's funny. So I think what's happening is that request.files always has an image parameter. It's just that sometimes there's nothing in it, so to speak. And print statements keep not working great for me, but we can try that as well. Let's print request.files. And that should come up in the unicorn piece there. We can save, well, I'll save it as it is. I'm gonna run it on a local terminal, so I'm gonna make a new one here, and we are in the right environment, and we can run python app.py, and I can be in the wrong directory again, because that's awesome. All right, and now we're in the right directory. Python app.py, our local test server is up, here it is. Let's refresh that, and so if we do something like this, and we hit submit, what I want to see is the failure to find a file called ASDF, not there was an empty file uploaded, which it looks like is exactly the error I'm getting. Here, dict keys. Okay, it's printing the dictionary keys. It's not exactly what I wanted. It's printing immutable multi-dict image file storage, quotes. Okay, and then if I, what a error page. If I choose a file to upload, it will work. Did not expect that. It also shows, okay, image file storage flower.jpg. So it looks like, how am I grabbing request.files, immutable dictionary, key is image, value is that, and then sometimes it's the key is image and the value is an empty file. That makes sense. File storage empty right here, image file storage and then nothing, versus image file storage and then there's the name. I bet this file storage object has like a dot file name or something like that. I am not choosing not to delve into that too much right now, because this already gives me enough information to know that reversing this if else will address the issue, because basically what I want is for there to be let the name override. And before, what was happening was because I had two if statements and having the form one under it, it would overwrite any image provided. So if I didn't test this case, but what's funny is that means if I had upload an image and type a path and hit submit, the typed path would win effectively. Let's save this, run that, run this. Looks like this will almost work. Okay, worked enough, right? So we're expecting it to look inside of this mounted drive, which on my local machine obviously doesn't exist. So we're good as good as we can be to test this out. Let's push our version. I want to address the question or the comment in our live chat from Gulliver 1999 about measuring the performance gained moving to Kubernetes. And it's an interesting question because one of the things that Cloud Run provides us is auto scaling. And while I suppose you could do the same thing in I mean, yes, you can absolutely do the same thing in Kubernetes. It's not as kind of hands-free. And so my thought is still kind of to, if I can get away with it, use Kubernetes for as little as possible and construct kind of, maybe what will end up happening is I'll only have Kubernetes act as effectively a file server that wraps this persistent disk, and then let either Cloud Run or Cloud Functions, like let that be taken care of by more managed services if I'm trying to kind of keep away from having too much of my head buried in the kind of cloud. So here's an example, buried in like cloud services management. So here's an example. I ran this thing, it says deployment unchanged, nothing happens. And of course it's because I did not update this number from 14 to 15. So now I'm going to rerun that command and we should be good to go. It says configured. Let's get the pods. We see a container is creating. We're going to get this value out, paste it in here, copy the exported environment variable, discard the pod. Usually in the time I can kind of copy paste this, the pod has started, the kubelets have started, and so I can like, by the time I get around to it, things have booted up, it looks good. Otherwise, if I jump straight over to the web page, like sometimes not everything's rolled out yet, and so now we're on version 15. We are expecting that I can do this, and that we can do this. Whoa, still not quite there, I guess. Weird. What did I inadvertently mess up the, where does it specifically say? Invalid file name. This error is still a return statement rather than setting this message. So I set message down here. Let's move this up. It's also in this, oh yeah, this is the right function. This function does everything. It does everything. And I'd also be curious as to kind of what kind of performance gains and benchmarking you'd want to see Gulliver 1999, because there's a couple options here, right? And the other piece of it is, if we try to do load testing, we throw lots of load at this web page. Right now, my cluster has 1, maybe 2 pods, right? If I have fewer, more, like Cloud Run will just keep scaling. And so we'd have to think about how to give it a fair comparison. Invalid, or message equals all these different things. We start out as blank. If we hit any of these, message will be set to this thing, and then we can do the thing. So let's push this one last time. So this kind of illustrates the full deployment workflow, right? So while I changed the HTML, I saved that. I changed the gcloud build command. I run that. While that's running, I go over to the deployment.yaml, update that. Oh, I already updated that. But yeah, if I was like optimizing the order, I would do that last. And then I can copy this, paste in here, press enter, wait for it to all finish, and then copy the pod ID into this. So sometimes I'll pre-delete this in preparation. What's nice is that having it all kind of run like that, it'll be done kind of instantly, so to speak, right? Like everything just rolls right into the next piece. But yeah, I think in general, this kind of idea of using Kubernetes, like this, it's not too bad, I guess. Like once I got into the flow of things, it wasn't too far off from like a decently productive development environment. I think Cloud Run could be better. The one thing I know that is relatively new to all this also is Cloud Code. And so that's something that I'm really excited to try out, is like this plugin to these editors. Why is it saying 15? It should be 16. Did I not update the index.html? That's usually why. Okay, I hadn't updated it yet. So I was like worried for a second. We made these messages. So let's see if we can get these messages to show up. Oh, gosh, come on. No such file or directory. That's not good. Oh, right, because there's no ASDF file, of course. But that means all of my checks failed. Oh, because I needed to, instead of just setting these messages, I needed to break out of these, right? Interesting. So if I go back, I'm making problems for myself by trying to add error messages. Yeah, none of this is going to work, ironically. The only thing that will work now is, I think, setting the text. But it still won't show our error messages, which is kind of funny. Because invalid trailing slash, nice. So weird behavior aside, hopefully this was a useful overview of kind of what deployment in, why my mouse is stuck. Okay, what a deployment in Kubernetes kind of looks like. And maybe if you're thinking about trying out Kubernetes, to remove some amount of the trepidation or fear holding you back around giving it a shot. It's really just a set of commands to get it deployed. And again, I'll give that tip around using kubectl describe pod and kubectl logs-f to be able to introspect into those pods, because invariably something will go wrong. You can see here, I'm able to really keep track of things as things happen fairly straightforwardly. And I could imagine there being a better workflow around this. My hope, fingers crossed, is that Cloud Code will address some of these things and maybe automate some of these steps for me. That would be really cool. I could imagine better bash script writing. That's on me. But yeah, all things considered, fairly decent. On Wednesday, we'll be, kind of going over this persistent disk issue. I'll show you what changes we made to our deployment.yaml and why, as well as point you to some resources if you want to incorporate persistent disks into your environment. And we'll talk about some alternatives as well. I've been exploring other ways to achieve the goal of having Kubernetes connect into some kind of persistent disk-like environment or file system environment that's shared across your various pods. And I think, if you have other questions, other topics you'd like to explore, Gulliver mentioned measuring performance change between Cloud Run and Kubernetes Engine. I think that would be really interesting. I think I would need a more interesting application, or at least a more reliable application that doesn't, that I don't keep breaking on my own by supplying bad data. So with that said, I'm looking forward to Wednesday, and hopefully I'll see you there.